Have you ever wanted to disappear? To delete all your social media accounts in the middle of the night, move to another city or country, cut off all contact with friends and family, and start an entirely new life? Even if you haven't had such thoughts yourself, some of your friends or acquaintances probably have, and that's normal. Psychology has long studied this phenomenon. Research shows that many people feel overwhelmed by the pressures of modern life. We're bombarded with negative news daily, and our constant connection to technology can make us feel trapped, with an overwhelming desire to escape from it all. In today's world, the idea of escape often means being alone to regain strength, and, in a sense, to heal. It's not limited to certain countries. People everywhere think about it. In Japan, such people are called johatsu, or the evaporated. In this video, I'll explain how ordinary people manage to disappear without leaving a trace, why families and police often turn a blind eye, where they disappear to, why they take this step, and how they survive. I'm sure almost all of us have felt, at least once, the desire to disappear, to go to another city or country, to start anew where no one knows us. Now, imagine you've actually done it. You left home without giving any explanation to your family about where you're going. Most likely, you'd choose somewhere quiet or perhaps a major city full of opportunities. But the johatsu have slightly different preferences, or rather, they have almost no choice regarding location, which we'll discuss later. These people may be no different from anyone else. They go to work, attend school, and live normal lives. But then one day, they simply evaporate. In Japan, there's a strong cultural emphasis on reputation and shame, coupled with overwork. And a person's psyche may not withstand the pressure from family, management, or society. Shame from unmet expectations by family or employer can be more terrifying than death. When these feelings become unbearable, some people decide to end their lives, while others simply disappear without a note or explanation. Families often don't go to the police due to shame and to avoid embarrassment. Although few people talk about this phenomenon openly, most Japanese are aware of the johatsu, and admitting that you have one in your family can lead to public humiliation. The police, even when approached, can do little to help. They won't intervene unless a crime or accident is involved. Unless there's evidence of a criminal case, the police are not allowed to provide relatives with any logs, calls, or surveillance footage. People's privacy in Japan is well protected, and there is still no unified database of missing persons. Do all the relatives really not care or have no desire to find their loved ones? The topic of johatsu, as mentioned, is taboo in Japan, but one Tokyo family made the search for their son public despite the taboo. Their son, Naruo, disappeared on May 3, 2002, after saying goodbye to his parents. The 24-year-old told them not to expect him for dinner. After that, he didn't return home for several days. The parents became concerned when they received a phone call from the Tokyo ferry company informing them that their son's backpack had been found on a ferry, arriving at the final stop of the route. The paperwork listed the parents as contacts, but Naruo himself was nowhere to be found. Ferry employees assured them that they would have noticed if someone had jumped into the water. Maybe he got off at an earlier stop, or perhaps he left his belongings on the ferry to mislead people. The police refused to investigate because there were no facts indicating that a crime had occurred. The family had no money for private detectives, so Shuichi, Naruo's brother, began to investigate on his own, but after 7 years, he found nothing. The parents wrote letters to the mayor of Tokyo and even the Prime Minister of Japan, urging them to address the problem of missing persons more proactively. They launched petitions demanding that the police spend more time distributing flyers and missing person reports. Several times, the family was invited on television programs, but there was never any news from their son. His mother said that most people who search for their loved ones do so in secret. Among the evaporated, the practice of covering their tracks is common. The French journalist Lena Mauger learned about this phenomenon in 2008 and devoted 5 years to studying it. She wrote a book containing the stories of various people she managed to find. Initially, many people refused to talk to her, insisting that such a phenomenon didn't exist in their country and that johatsu was just a legend. She couldn't even hire an interpreter. When Japanese interpreters found out what subject they'd be working on, they politely refused to cooperate. Eventually, a man named Jun, a 50-year-old expert on the Yakuza, agreed to help her as an interpreter and in her investigation. He also helped her find a private company that assists in locating missing persons. In addition to such services, Japan has so-called Yoniga companies. These are businesses that help people escape and cover their tracks or even stage break-ins to simulate a robbery. Since there is nothing illegal about being a johatsu from the perspective of Japanese law, a whole industry of companies that help people vanish has formed. Some even have their own websites. Hidehito Hattori, the owner of one such company, explained how he got into this business. He originally had a regular moving company, but one day a woman asked him to help her vanish. Her husband was mired in debt, and she feared he would ruin her life too. Hattori agreed. He then placed an ad for his company offering Yoniga services, which means overnight moves in Japan. Potential customers quickly understood, and soon he barely had time to process all the orders. He charged 400,000 yen for overnight transportation, 3 times the usual rate. Hattori later wrote a book about it. He didn't consider people who decided to disappear as cowards. On the contrary, he believed he helped them find their way to a better life. Having experienced Japan's culture of shame and reputation, he understood their motives and feelings. Johatsu is an extreme degree of despair when one sees no other option but to run away. The journalist also spoke to another owner of a similar company, Miho Saita. Like Hattori, she believes she is helping people. She herself once ran away from her past, which left her with a scar on her cheek. Saita says, "Back then, there were no laws protecting victims of domestic violence. The police could only ask the abuser to stop. I was alone, so I took my dog, got into the car, and disappeared." The disappearances organized by these companies happen under the cover of night. Employees pretend to be movers or repair crews. They drive up in unmarked trucks, barricade the windows, and help clients quickly pack and leave. After a few hours, the person is gone. These companies help people settle in new places and do everything to make it impossible to find them. But if someone decides to return to their former life, no one stops them. The companies only fulfill their duties. If someone wants to return, they can, but johatsu rarely return to their relatives. Depending on circumstances, the cost of such services can range from several hundred to tens of thousands of dollars. Those who can't afford these services have to disappear on their own, using published manuals. One of them is called The Complete Manual of Evaporation, labeled Refuse Your Sad, Miserable Reality, which is quite self-empowering. What pushes people to become johatsu? The reasons vary. Sometimes people don't want to deal with bureaucratic hassles, so it's easier to disappear than to formalize a divorce. Some lose large amounts of money gambling. Some even leave their small children with their spouse. Others flee domestic violence, which the police used to ignore. Some are connected to religious sects and decide to cut ties. There have been cases when young people evaporated because of failed exams, unable to bear the shame. The largest number of evaporations occurred during financial crises. People get into debt trying to feed themselves and their families. Annual interest on loans could exceed 100%. Those who didn't repay were threatened, and the amount owed increased even further. Some loan companies were owned by the mafia, so the term yamekin appeared, referring to money borrowed from the yakuza. So, where do the Japanese go? Some have managed to start a better life after evaporating, but this is more the exception. Few johatsu have enough money for a new life. The vast majority settle in the Sanya neighborhood, often referred to as the ghetto that doesn't exist. This area of Tokyo can't be found on official maps, and legally doesn't exist. Tokyo, the capital of Japan, is one of the most high-tech cities in the world. Among the modern skyscrapers and neon-lit streets, there is the Sanya district. Almost the entire neighborhood consists of slums. People live in tiny, dirty rooms with no internet, no private toilets, and lacking many necessities. In some shelters, tenants are forbidden to speak loudly after 6 in the evening. Many johatsu live as invisible citizens, taking any heavy, low-paid work. To make matters worse, this neighborhood is controlled by the yakuza. Among the johatsu are those who, living in such conditions, end up joining them. Sanya becomes a new home for the johatsu. The likelihood of someone coming here to look for them is slim. Few relatives would venture here, but occasionally tourists or journalists visit. Because of its notoriety, Sanya has gained some popularity. Here are a few stories of people that journalist Lena Mauger met. She recorded their stories. 50-year-old Norihiro arranged his disappearance 10 years ago. He was an engineer with a wife and son. When he was laid off, he didn't dare tell his family. Instead, he got up every day, dressed for work, and left as usual. On payday, he shaved, said goodbye to his wife, got on the subway, and vanished. He never saw his family again. It hurts me to think about my parents searching for me. I hope they're doing well. Maybe they still believe I'll come back. Or maybe they're already dead, he says 10 years later, now doing hard, low-paying labor. He doesn't mention his wife and son. Norihiro lives in a dilapidated room with no windows, sleeping on tatami mats. I am one of thousands, he says. 20-year-old Masao did not return home after prison. He didn't want his parents to be ashamed, so he went to live in Sanya. He thought it would be better if his relatives believed he was dead. Martial artist Ichiro was optimistic about his future. With his wife, Tomoko, they lived in Saitama, an upscale suburb of Tokyo. Their son Taro was born there. They took out a loan to open a dumpling shop, but during an economic downturn, the business failed. The couple did what many do. They sold their house, packed up, and disappeared. It's a strange existence outside of society in one of the world's most developed cities. But recently, the area has begun to change. Many cheap hotels have appeared, and Sanya is being recognized by more people, including tourists. It's a chance to make some money. A tourism boom. But are the lives of the disappeared becoming easier? A rhetorical question. Thank you very much for watching.